Okay. Does anybody need to get up and do calisthenics or anything?
Give us 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Well, I'm very, truly very honored to be here. I received a call from Bill just a few months ago, and he said that a good friend of mine named Jeff Jenkins had recommended to him that I come and speak. And then he told me something that another good friend of mine told him about me, which I knew was totally not true. But I was able to work through my schedule and have been excited about being here, and it has certainly been wonderfully worth it. I'll tell you this morning, I've been back there feverishly taking notes. From Dean, I learned that I really need to learn to like the other 11 men that I serve with. And by the way, I learned that Alexa's pretty cool, you know, the way he's using that and got his printer stuff. From Mike, you know, I actually had three notes, Mike, on you, and the first one was that the threads of incredible Christian women are worth studying, and for someone who doesn't preach a lot but does from time to time, I took a really good side note of that. I also learned from Mike that I wasn't going to tell you what I do, and I'm not, but I do want you to know I'm not a lawyer. Yes, sir. Now, as I heard in the hallways, though, and sometimes in the bathroom, I am something else that I don't think is a good thing necessarily here. I'm from Texas, but I'm not a lawyer. You know, I also learned from Mike that you should really print out all of your slides, so you have them right here. From Don, I learned that we are truly in a war, and it's a war that's winnable. And I also learned that probably in about 25 years I'll be an experienced elder, and I don't mean that one actually tongue in cheek at all. I thought that was wonderful, and then I did get a chance to catch up with Terry Johnson, and I'm really happy that he's going to come up after me and he can clean up any mess that I make. Because I may make a mess or two. I did have an opportunity. I got in a little earlier last night than I anticipated. Originally, we had an opportunity to have dinner with these gentlemen, with Leon and Kevin and Bill, and I told them I couldn't make it, but I made it in early from Washington D.C. and I actually drove over to Bill's house and we ended up having dinner and got to spend some time together last night, and I had an opportunity to learn more about these three men and the heart that they have, and I just think this is a wonderful event, and so I'm really appreciative of them for putting this together. When I talked to Bill a few months ago, there at the time there were two topics left, and so I looked at those two topics and I got to pick from those two. What I didn't know is I'd be the first speaker after lunch. But I have to be honest with you, when I looked at the title of both of them, one of them really jumped out at me, but they both had this word in them that I shared with them a little bit about this last night, that sometimes wasn't always the best word for me. And that word that was in both of them was shepherd. I don't know about you, but I'm 57 years old, to give you an idea of how old I know I look 31, but I'm 57. And I'm a fifth generation Church of Christ. My grandfather was a gospel preacher. His father was a gospel preacher. I've been preaching since I was 11 years old. I'm not really a preacher, but I have been around the church my entire life, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to be led and groomed and sometimes disciplined by wonderful elders who cared deeply about me. I've also sometimes seen some men that have kind of taken that shepherd thing maybe to a little different place than what was intended. And this is not going to be a negative talk this morning, but I will tell you that for about 10 years ago or so, sometimes I struggled with the word shepherd, because usually when I heard the word shepherd, it was in a sentence that went something like this: the shepherds have decided, or the shepherds have approved, and so on and so on. And not that those sentences are just horrible in themselves, but the tone with which they're delivered sometimes is not always the best tone. And I would tell you that for me, someone who was not necessarily young 10 years ago, it really kind of frustrated me, but it also drove me to do a lot of study around that word. And so when Bill put that out there, gave me those two titles, one of them, you can see it up there behind me, really jumped off at me. And I want you to know that 10 years later, after a lot of study, I learned to really love the word shepherd. And I'm going to use that just a moment for a jumping off point for what my talk is to be about, which is the impact of the shepherd on the sheep. You know, here in 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter calls elders shepherds. He says you can see there in the second sentence, in the second verse, he says, where he kicks off this kind of big, challenging message that he's delivering to them. He says, shepherd the flock. And if you just stop there and just kind of pause for a second, the first thing that has to enter your mind is why shepherd, as you can see by my title of this slide. Now let's read it together. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and as a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive an unfading crown of glory. Peter very specifically used this word shepherd on purpose. Now, it's a very biblical word. As a matter of fact, it's one of the oldest professions in the Bible. If you look over in Genesis chapter 2, you'll find that probably the oldest profession mentioned in the Bible is an overseer. In Genesis 2, God told Adam to keep the garden, or to oversee the garden. And you fast forward just a little bit, and in chapter 4, it says, now Abel was a keeper of the flock. And then as you walk through the Old Testament, kind of moving towards today, you find all these names in the Bible who were shepherds: Abel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Lot, Laban, Moses, David. There were so many that we know of in the Bible who were shepherds. You know, what's interesting too is if you look in Luke chapter 2, you see who had it revealed to them while they were watching over their sheep at night that Jesus was born. And if you flip to John chapter 10 with me, I'll just touch a couple verses there. Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. But he says, I'm the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. By the way, I had an opportunity to speak, I don't know, sometime about a year and a half ago. And it's worth a study at some point to just look, when you do a walkthrough with Jesus through the Sermon on the Mount, and if that's all you did was just take that sermon and really play through what he said, it would almost be impossible to not know who he was. And I did a series on They Should Have Known. And right here, as he was talking to them in John 10, they just should have known who he was. As Jacob was dying in Genesis 48, listen to what he said. He said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day. Once again, shepherd. But why shepherd? Well, in biblical times, shepherds were men with no status whatsoever. They had a role that had no fame, no status, and very little income. And truly, they were the ultimate example of a servant. And specifically a servant who had to be willing to lay down their life for those that they protected. Does it sound similar? Look at Mark 10, verse 42. Jesus said, "You know those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever will be great among you must be your servant. And whoever be first among you must be slave of all." What's interesting, if you read about shepherds, it's amazing, by the way. Google's kind of a funny thing. You Google something about shepherd and people get it all backwards. But if you look in history, what you find, and actually it started out this morning like the first picture that Dean had, and you could see what we were looking in Dean's first picture was the back of a flock of sheep, and way up at the front was the shepherd. And that's how shepherds worked. They were at the very front of the sheep. And what they did was actually they led. They didn't stay in the back and drive with a whip or with noise or even with a dog. Sheep herders, on the flip side, that's exactly what they do. So this description, when Peter says, shepherd the flock, he's talking through the lens of what we have the opportunity to have seen throughout time from God on what a shepherd was to be. And understanding that God himself is a shepherd, that his son is the good shepherd, and that we are to be shepherds. God's model from the beginning of time. I'm teaching Ephesians right now. I said to someone earlier, this is my fourth state of the week, and it's the fourth time I've been in front of a microphone this week, and somebody in the back asked me, so why don't you talk all the time? I said, it's not because I'm good at talking. I just know a lot of people and I have to go around and talk about things. But I can tell you that for me, as I've been digging into Ephesians, which is what I'm teaching tomorrow, that'll be number 5 with a microphone tomorrow morning, back in Texas. By the way, Texas is tied with Alabama 10-10 at the end of the first half, if anybody was wondering. But Alabama did knock out the starting Texas quarterback at the end of the first quarter, so it's going to be a bad second half. But just know that. But sorry about that. What's really interesting about why you see God as the shepherd and why God had the model built where his son was to be a shepherd and why we're to be shepherds is because his model all along was to create followers. That was the point. You know, I've always, there are these certain things that people say if you grow up in the church. Matter of fact, I knew you were supposed to end a prayer in some way, shape, or form by saying, in Jesus or through Jesus. I thought you were supposed to say guide, guard, and direct also. When I was growing up. I really did. I mean, almost every prayer I heard ended with that. I said it one time. I was about 12 years old. I ended a prayer with that. And when I walked off, one of the elders caught me, stood up. He was right there on the second row, and he stood up and he walked me to the back and said, don't ever say that again. He said, do you know the difference between guide and direct? And I said, no, sir. And he said, no, neither does anybody else, so don't say that again. But you know, what I've learned through my life and over time is that God is very specific. And if you spend time in his word, he was so detailed and so granular with how he did things. And as I've been even preparing for this Ephesians class, what I love about Ephesians 1 is you see God's plan there from chapter 1, verses 3 through 14. If you haven't studied it lately, go home later and study it. it's fantastic how detailed Paul is about laying out the plan that God had all along. And you could take the word shepherd and just write it right across there in verses 3 through 14, Ephesians 1. Throughout Scripture, shepherd is the key. And it's the key because God created us to be able to choose, to be able to love or to hate. And that choice meant that the plan was that we would be followers, and that his leaders, him, his son, the apostles, all the way to us, that we be leaders, but we would be leaders like shepherds, not managers, leaders like shepherds that walked in front of the flock and quietly and lovingly led the sheep. That was his point. You know, Jesus was so interesting. I had an opportunity. Jeff Jenkins, if you guys know who Jeff is, he used to kind of throw a curveball at me from time to time. And he called me on a Sunday morning at 8:15 while I was in the Starbucks line and say, hey, I couldn't make it back. Can you preach for me this morning? And so I learned I had to always have a sermon in my Bible. And I'm actually not kidding. I always had to have a sermon in my Bible just to be ready to go. And one of those times, I had put together a sermon on just following. That's what it was about. And what was so neat is before I ever spoke that sermon, about 3 months later, I got a call, which is something that one of those kind of strange mission things I have an opportunity to do because of the fact that I travel all the time. And it was from a group in Chicago that said, hey, we've got this Christian businessman's lunch. And, you know, we heard that you're a Christian business leader and we want you to come speak at this event. And I said, great. When is it? I'm there. Count me there. And I went. And what they'd ask you to do, all the speakers, by the way, anyone in the room ever heard of Tim Keller? He was the guy that was there the quarter before I was. And evidently he's kind of a big deal. I've never read anything about him, but I guess he's supposed to be some big deal. He's written a bunch of books. And I actually know a little more about who he is than I'm letting on. But so I very much so disagree with him doctrinally, but that's just another, we don't have enough time for that. But I got invited, and what they wanted every speaker to do when you got there was to go up and just simply say, you know, who you are, where you're from, how you learned about Jesus, and why you were a believer. And then talk about the impact that has on you and how you lead because of that. And I'll tell you, I thought it was a huge opportunity. I was really excited about it. I got there were like 300 or 400 people. I got up and I answered those questions. But that third question, I stopped. I just paused, just a really long pause until everyone was looking at me. And I said, you know, I said, here's the question. I read it. I actually held up the sheet so they could see I had a sheet. I said, here's the third question it was asking me. And I read it off. And basically what it said was, tell us why you're a believer. And I said, I just want you to know I'm not a believer. I'm not. I'm different than that. I'm a follower. I'm a disciple. And I said, there's just so much more. I told him this. I read this verse to him, John 8:31. You can see it up there behind me. Then Jesus said to those Jews who believed in him, those Jews who were believers, this is what he said to them. If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. And I told him that. I said, yes, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. But I'm not just a believer. I'm a follower. And then I have to tell you the most provocative thing I said in that meeting. You'll love this. I told him when I got to the end, I said, I'm going to go a little different than what you asked for. I just want to leave you with 3 things that I think are really important. Because what I didn't want to do was go in there and offend a bunch of people. I wanted to challenge them to think about Christ differently and to think about the depth of the word differently. Hoping that some would follow up with me, which, by the way, they have. But here's this really provocative thing that I said. And remember who I was speaking to. I was speaking to the Christian Businessmen's Lunch. And here's what I said that fired them up. I said, you can't get to heaven without Jesus. And then we went to the Q&A. And you know what happened in the Q&A? They asked me 5 questions. And they really weren't questions. They were frustrated men who were pushing me about what I said. And the one thing they wanted to talk about was that they just couldn't get their head around the fact that I would say that you can't get to heaven without Jesus. It's a Christian Businessmen's Lunch. And in their mind, that was a provocative, terrible thing to say. Well, back to today and back to here and how it ties in. God built us to choose. And since he built us to choose, then we are to either be followers or not. And therefore the leaders, the way he led, the way his son led, and the way we're to lead, is to be leaders that create followers. Jesus was focused on creating followers, and we are to be as well. Now, you know, it's kind of easy to say that. If you look at Luke 9:23, then he said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. And you know, it always makes me nervous when someone like Dean Murphy's in the room, because I butcher Greek words all the time. Because I didn't grow up around the Greek words, and so if you hear a little East Texas come out, by the way, Bill kept saying he introduced me last night to his wife as a big city elder. There's nothing big city about me. I grew up in a smaller town than anybody in this room, I guarantee you. But I do kind of live near Dallas, so I guess I'm a big city elder. But I'm going to butcher some Greek words. But I want you to understand what Jesus was talking about from a follower perspective. I want you to notice this. In essence, what he's doing is defining, and actually more than just saying follower, he's defining the depth and commitment. So let's start at the end first. So you see that at the very end where I have follow highlighted or in bold. Well, that follow actually means akolutheo. That's the word. Did I do it right? Is that close enough, Dean, or do you know?
You know, I'm from Tennessee. I'm not much.
That's good. That's perfect. But that's what this word is here for follow. Let me tell you what the definition, the very precise definition is that Jesus was calling out when he said, follow me. It means to follow, to join one as a disciple. Listen to the last, to cleave steadfastly to one. To cleave steadfastly to one. Now let's go back up to the top, because it actually, what he said at the top, it's pretty big. It's hard to get your head around. Because notice what he says. After he says, come after me, follow me, which is what he's saying. He says, let him deny himself. Let him deny himself. By the way, this is only found 4 times in Scripture. These 2 words put together only 4 times in Scripture. And here's those second ones. I'm going to do my best on it. Arneomahi, hiotu. That's those 2 together. Deny himself. Let me tell you what it means. It means to completely disregard his own interest. So this follow that Jesus was talking about is that follow that I've been talking about. That because we can choose, and we can choose to be completely selfish, or we can choose to be halfway there, but neither one of those meet the standard that was God's plan. And the plan was to this fully, completely denying of self, completely turn away from our own interest and to follow him. What I would tell you, it is our responsibility, it's the shepherd's responsibility today to lead others in a way that they will do exactly that. That they will not only have done that once, but they will continue in that denying themselves. I have a good friend. His name's Barry Conchie. You can see his name. It's right there on the bottom of that book. And Barry wrote this book in 2008. By the way, I don't know if have you ever heard of the Strengths Finder? Anybody in the room ever heard of the Strengths Finder? So there's a guy named Don Clifton. You can see his name on the slide. I had an opportunity to meet Don Clifton when he was 88 years old back in the 90s. No one has written more or studied more about leadership than Don Clifton. No one. He's one of the nicest gentlemen you'll ever meet as well. And Barry worked for his company for many, many years. And so almost everything that comes out of that group has something to do with leadership in some way, shape, or form. And by the way, the one behind me, that I have the picture of, it's the best-selling leadership book of all times. Well, what's interesting about it is that I had gotten to know Barry before he wrote the book, and so I knew what he was writing. He didn't let me see it, but he was talking to me about it while he was doing it. And he took a different approach. And the reason he took a different approach is because most leadership books that you read, they're written by the leader, like Jack, written by Jack Welch of GE. And so in the secular world, when you read a leadership book, they're written by the leader. And they're from that leader's perspective about why they're a great leader. And I don't know about you, but I usually get through about 1.5 chapters and I'm done. I'm out. I'm finished with it. What was different here, what Barry did, was they studied over 10,000 followers over a 5-year window of time, just talking to followers to ask them what they looked for in a leader, to understand why followers followed the leaders that they followed. And here's what they found. They found there were 4 things, 4 big things that mattered to followers. And believe it or not, only these 4. And that's what was so strange. Over 10,000 people answering these questions, and every one of them led to these 4 things. They were said in, if you were from Texas or Tennessee or whatever, they were said in different ways, but it all narrowed down to these 4. Number 1 is followers follow leaders who have compassion. They're kind, they're thoughtful, unselfish, caring. They care about others honorably and fully. They care about them on their best days, and they care about them on their worst days. But they care about them. And it doesn't matter what kind of organization you're in, that sits at the very top. Number 2, as you can see there, is trust. They follow leaders that they trust. They follow leaders that are honest, and they have clarity. But most importantly, they follow leaders from a trust perspective that are predictable. That they can know what they're going to do or going to say because it's constant and it's stable. That's the third one. They follow leaders that are actually stable. What's interesting about this one is that in their study, what they found is that people leave organizations more often because of number 3 than anything else. Some people hang in there even with leaders that are not compassionate. And they hang in for a decent amount of time, believe it or not, even if they don't have enough trust. But when they see the organization they're in is unstable, they're gone. And they're gone just like that. What's interesting about stable is it calls out a couple things. Number 1, it calls out that the ability to be depended upon. But the second one is the one I like the most, is that leaders can provide calm guidance in difficult times, and they're steadfast. We heard that just a few minutes ago before lunch. And then finally, these leaders that followers follow have hope. That meaning stability is in today, but hope is in tomorrow. And they're going to follow those followers if they believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. A couple statistics for you might be worthwhile. Because I don't know about you, but the men that I serve with, we spend a lot of time thinking about, praying about, and talking about how engaged our folks are, how engaged in Him they are. And I want you to listen to these things about these 4 things that followers do. So number 1, when followers believed that their leadership really cared about them, they were 70% more productive in their organization. When followers trusted their leaders, 1 in 2 were engaged. Now that's kind of sad, but 50% is actually pretty good, because you know what happens when they don't trust their leaders? Only 1 in 12 are engaged. 1 in 12. This is across 10,000, more than 10,000 people. Next, followers are 9 times more likely to be engaged if they feel that the organization's future is secure or stable. And last, 69% of followers strongly agree that their leaders made them feel enthusiastic about the future. That 69% group was engaged, and the balance was not. Only 1% if they disagree with the statement. God's model is about leaders that function like shepherds. God's model is about leaders that create followers. God's model actually, if you spend time studying Jesus, take these 4 and just do a study and look at how He taught and how He led and what He did. And what you'll find is that He did this, 10x what any of us could ever do, but it really centered still around these 4. I'll spend a little time on those with you. First and foremost, on each one of these, what my encouragement to you today, back to the title and what I was to talk about, which is, what is our impact on the sheep? Well, as I walk through each one of these, I want to give you 2 perspectives to think about. Number 1 is that we have a responsibility for them to see through us. In other words, they need to see each of these things, compassion and trust and stability and hope. They need to see it in Him, and we have a responsibility to help them see that through us, where we're not leading them to create followers of us. We're leading them to create followers of Him. But secondarily, I would tell you that they should clearly see those 4 things in us. Because if they don't, then they may not hang around long enough to see it in Him. I put these verses down. I'm not going to walk through all of them, so I don't want to scare you. But I do want to just mention, I want you to think about each one of these. So for compassion, through us, they must know that God so loved the world, that He sent His only Son even for them, through us. Through us, they need to know that His love is so strong for us that He sent His Son to die. They loved us so much that Jesus Himself loved us so much that He gave Himself for us. They need to see it. Once again, not just on their own, through us. And they need to see that God cares enough for Him that they can cast all of their anxieties on Him. Chapter 5 with Peter, where we were earlier, verses 1 through 4. If you just spend a little bit of time in that, you can see that Peter's pointing at compassion. He said that they should, that let me go back to the verse. I'm going to just read it for you specifically. Listen to how he said it, just so I don't blow the quote. Listen to it. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly. And now listen to this next part. As God would have you. So very specifically, Peter's call out to them was to do this in a way where they could see God. Next, I just got all my notes scrambled, so now you guys got to hold with me for a second. Trustworthiness. You remember what I said about trust? I said that when followers don't find leaders trustworthy, that only 1 in 12 are engaged. So when we think about engaging our folks, they need to be trustworthy. But what's important is they need to be trustworthy towards him. Through us, they should understand that that they can trust God with everything. Through us, they should understand that he will never lead them or forsake them. Through us, they should know that they can be forgiven. You know, here, I said this to Kevin last night. Here, unfortunately, on this earth, you're always 17 in your hometown. And you know what? Sometimes that can be the case in our congregations. I had an older brother. He died a number of years ago, 20 years ago this year. He was a young man when he died. And he had a pretty rough life. He had a lot of chemical dependencies. And he made it through those, fortunately, about 3 years before he got cancer and died. And as he was making his way past them, I didn't live in the same town. I lived a long way. I was living in California at the time. And I checked on him all the time, and I'd call him, and I'd encourage him to go to church. And I kept encouraging him to get back in the Word. And he said, you know, it's just hard for me to go up there. He said, because they keep seeing me for what I was. They just won't see me for what I am. And, you know, we can do that a bit as well. But they don't see that in Christ. And so we need to help and make sure they don't. And finally, they need to trust that they can do all things through him that strengthens them. The third one is stability. Followers follow leaders that they can depend on. Just 100%, that's what they do. And remember, this is the one that people leave by. Within the chaos of their lives, through us, they need to know that God is an everlasting rock, an impenetrable stone. They need to know that if he said something, he'll do it every time. And he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He's not a moving target. You know, for us, we always have this unique opportunity with people that we are engaged with as elders. And isn't it easy to see that young couple that's in their mid-30s, and they've got young kids going to our Bible class, and she's teaching Bible class, and he's working with our youth. Those are the really easy ones to engage with. It's just so nice to spend time there. You just want to go to dinner with them. You want to have them over at your house. But it's way more difficult to spend time with the ones that are having trouble. And they're not engaged. And they show up maybe once or twice a month. But I tell you, it's our responsibility for them to have that stable place. That stable place that really cares about them and would do anything to keep them from being lost. Finally is hope. You know, I would tell you that this whole thing about helping someone see a better tomorrow, I think in some ways it's the most difficult one to teach, because sometimes people, if they haven't gotten in deep enough, they can't really grasp it so well. But many times it just comes from how you feel. There's something that Don Clifton used to study, and he called it goodwill. Let me tell you what it means. I want you to think about somebody in your life that you bump into this way. When someone's really high in goodwill, what it means is then after you connect with them, you just feel better. You know how it is? There's some people like that in your life that when you connect with them, you spend 5 minutes with them, 10 minutes with them, or an hour with them, you just feel better. No matter how difficult the subject is. That's what goodwill looks like to Don Clifton. What I want you to know is that's what hope looks like. When we enthusiastically bring hope to those where we're responsible, in good times and bad, in simple subjects, in celebrations, and in challenges, they should just feel better because they got to spend a little bit of time with us. It's that enthusiasm, that energy that they should just get from us. It's not always about what we say. It's almost always about what we do. I love Peter. I want you to know that most of what I quoted here, I started off with Peter because I love Peter. I really do. I think Paul was really smart, but Peter's my man. And he is because I can look at someone like Peter, knowing just how broken and messed up he was sometimes, and knowing how broken and messed up I can be sometimes, and I can have tremendous hope in tomorrow. But the thing that really draws me to Peter most is just that enthusiasm. You can just feel, when you read the scriptures, when you read something that has anything to do with Peter, you can just feel it jumping out of the Bible at you. That's that hope piece. And we got to be built in that hope enough that they can see it. Last couple slides real quick for you. You see this verse? You know these verses. Matthew 5, 14 through 16. And I would tell you that this is Jesus provided here great clarity and an incredible challenge to his followers with this. But I can assure you that for us, this should be all caps. I went too far. It should be all caps. For some reason, my all caps isn't coming up, so we'll just leave it at that. Yep, it's not working. But let's read it together. You're the light of the world, a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. This was to his followers. This is to us as shepherds. And it should be capitalized for us. So how does the shepherd impact the sheep? Well, number one, I'd say that through our love, they should see and feel his love. And by the way, a big part of the way that they see that is they see us loving each other. And fortunately, that's been spoken of twice this morning already. But love is one of those things that until you see it, you can't believe it. And they can see it by the way we love each other, and certainly the way that we love them. Number two is through our trust, they should develop a deep trust in him. That way, on their darkest days, they know that he's standing beside them. Through our stability, they should see and feel his peace in their lives. I am telling you, peace is one of those big words that's in the Bible that we need to spend a lot of time teaching. There are so few people that have peace in their life, and none that could have it without him. And then finally, through our teaching and our care and our love for his word, they should truly deny themselves and follow him. I love the title for what we're doing here this week. And so I thought I'd close with a simple sentence along that title. The Lord is our shepherd, ours. And we should be doing everything we can in our power, thinking about compassion and trust and stability and hope to help others see him and to drink from his still waters. Thank you.